Welcome to Pacific States Explorations in the Arts. Today, we are embarking on a forensic investigation. In this explainer, we aren't just going to look at pretty pictures. We are actually going to learn exactly how art historians decode the past. Think of this as your foundational training for acting as a historical detective, investigating the visual artifacts that our ancestors left behind.
Okay, let's dive into this and look at our roadmap. Today, we'll cover 4 main steps. First, what art history actually is. Second, the questions to ask. Third, the vocabulary of art. And fourth, different ways of seeing.
So, Section 1. What is art history? It's all about a persisting event.
To really understand what makes our discipline unique, we have to recognize that an artwork is a persisting event. Basically, it's an object made in the past that physically survives right into our present day. Now, if you stroll into a modern museum today, you might just admire the sheer size of a painting, or maybe you're deeply moved by a sculpture. You can judge a work entirely based on your own life experiences. That is art appreciation. And honestly, it requires absolutely no historical knowledge. Art history, on the other hand, is a completely different discipline. Because these objects are persisting events, art history demands that we act as those historical detectives we talked about, to determine the original context and the specific circumstances of an object's creation. You simply cannot fully understand an artwork without knowing the world that birthed it. The thing is, modern museum culture has kinda skewed our understanding of how art is usually made. Take the 20th century American painter Georgia O'Keeffe, for example. When she painted her beautiful floral compositions, she did so alone in a private studio, sending them off to commercial galleries without having any idea who would actually purchase them or where they would end up. That is a very recent phenomenon. Historically speaking, O'Keeffe's approach is actually the exception, not the rule. Throughout history, most artists didn't create for the open market or museum crowds. They worked for specific patrons, fulfilling a specific purpose for a specific setting.
So, if most historical art was made for a specific context that is now totally lost to us, how do we get it back? We can't just guess, right? We need a structured method to interrogate these historical documents. What specific questions do art historians ask to interrogate an artwork?
Let's move to Section 2. Questions art historians ask. Time to put on that historical detective hat.
Whenever a scholar approaches a piece of visual culture, they have a strict set of inquiries they absolutely must run through to place the work in its proper context. So the crucial point is that we must answer these 5 fundamental questions. How old is it? What is its style? What is its subject? Who made it? And who paid for it? Look, if we cannot determine a monument's age, its chronology, we simply cannot place it in history. Only by working through style, subject, attribution, and patronage can we unlock an object's true meaning. Let's explore how we actually go about answering a few of these.
First up, how do we date a piece? Well, we look for 4 types of evidence. First, physical evidence relies on the materials themselves. For instance, if a statue is made of plastic, it obviously couldn't have been made before the invention of plastic. Simple enough. Next, documentary evidence looks for written records, like an official receipt noting exactly when a bishop paid an artist. Then, internal evidence looks at what is actually depicted in the artwork, maybe a hairstyle or clothing that was fashionable only during a specific decade. And finally, stylistic evidence analyzes the artist's distinctive manner, though this is definitely the most subjective and unreliable of the 4.
Once we know an object's age, we look at its style. But style varies wildly by geography. This is what we call regional style. Look at these 2 churches. On the left is Beauvais Cathedral in France, featuring these towering stone vaults and massive expanses of stained glass. On the right is Santa Croce in Florence, Italy, with a low timber roof and small, widely separated windows. These were built at almost the exact same time, at the end of the 13th century, and they serve similar religious purposes. Their strikingly different appearances are dictated almost entirely by their geographic region.
Then we have personal style, the distinctive manner of individual artists. Here we see Georgia O'Keeffe's work alongside her contemporary, Ben Shahn. While O'Keeffe was turning organic flower petals into powerful, abstract compositions of color and shape, Shahn was painting The Passion of Sacco and Vanzetti. That was a stinging social commentary on a highly controversial murder trial featuring coffins and a college president. 2 American artists working around the same time, producing radically different works based purely on their chosen subjects and individual manners. Figuring out the subject of a piece involves iconography, which literally means the writing of images. This is how we decode symbols. In Albrecht Dürer's terrifying late 15th century print, The 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, we see abstract ideas codified into human form, known as personifications. We know exactly who is who by their attributes. War wields a sword. Pestilence draws a bow. Famine swings scales. And death? He is depicted as an emaciated old man holding a pitchfork. By decoding these specific symbols, the artwork's real meaning reveals itself to us.
Now that we know the questions to ask, we realize that describing what we actually see requires extreme precision. We can't just look at a painting and say it looks nice or deep. We need specialized tools and vocabulary to literally see the mechanics of visual culture. So what are these tools?
That brings us to Section 3, the vocabulary of art. It's time to analyze form.
Welcome to the essential terminology of formal analysis. Honestly, mastering these terms is like putting on a brand new pair of glasses that brings the history of art into sharp focus. Let's start with color and light. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the difference between natural light and the painter's light. Natural sunlight is additive light. It's the sum of all visible wavelengths. But the painter's light on a canvas is subtractive light. Paint pigments produce their color by absorbing or subtracting all the light in the spectrum except the color you see reflecting back into your eyes.
And this brilliantly illustrates how easily our eyes can actually be tricked. The artist Josef Albers spent his career proving that color perception is completely relative and unstable. He painted hundreds of canvases with the exact same composition of concentric squares, a series called Homage to the Square. By only manipulating the saturation, the brightness or dullness, and the tonality of the colors, he proved that the squares actually appear to change size depending on the colors placed next to them. It perfectly highlights what he called the vast discrepancy between physical fact and psychic effect.
Artists also manipulate size to convey meaning, not just for visual tricks. This is called hierarchy of scale. Take a look at this bronze plaque from Benin, Nigeria. The central figure, the Benin king, is mounted on horseback, but notice the glaring disproportion. The king is massive compared to his horse. That's contrary to nature, sure, but it further aggrandizes his power. And look at the tiny figures next to his feet. By intentionally enlarging the elements considered the most important within a composition, the sculptor instantly communicates the social status of everyone in the scene.
Now let's look at how artists handle space. On the left side, French painter Claude Lorraine uses Western perspective conventions. He decreases the size of objects in the distance and uses converging diagonal lines to create the illusion of deep space. Over on the right, Japanese artist Ogata Korin paints plum trees by viewing the trees from the ground, but viewing the stream between them from above. He's prioritizing flat shapes and swelling curves over deep space. The takeaway here is that neither the French nor the Japanese method is the correct picture of the world. They are just entirely different pictorial conventions.
We see this exact same divide in how single figures are placed in space. The Flemish artist Peter Paul Rubens uses foreshortening in his Lion Hunt. He paints bodies at these steep angles to the picture plane to create a very dramatic illusion of depth. Conversely, the ancient Egyptian portrait of his sire uses no foreshortening at all. Instead, it combines a frontal torso with profile legs, an unnatural 90-degree twist at the waist. Why? Specifically to present the most precise, complete picture of the human body parts without overlapping them.
When it comes to 3D space, sculptural technique falls into two basic categories. If you are casting a bronze, you're using an additive technique, building up forms around a framework. But carving is a subtractive technique. You begin with an original mass, like a big block of marble or wood, and the final form is simply a reduction of that mass. You are literally cutting away the excess.
The great Michelangelo Buonarroti famously anchored this subtractive definition. He viewed carving as a process of liberating the statue within the block. In one of his unfinished marbles, you can visibly see a twisting nude male form emerging right out of the rough stone block. Michelangelo didn't feel he was building a figure. He believed he was simply leaving behind the statue by cutting away the excess material that trapped it.
Let's move to and see how this builds our final and perhaps most important capability as art historians. We've learned the methods, we've learned the vocabulary, but if these objects are historical documents from completely foreign times and places, how do we actually comprehend them without just projecting our own modern assumptions onto them?
Section 4. Different ways of seeing. Time to confront culture-bound blindness.
To truly comprehend cultures unlike our own, we must confront what scholars call culture-bound blindness. We all have native presuppositions, and if we aren't careful, these will heavily distort our picture of the past. Just look at these two portraits of the exact same 19th century Maori chieftain. On the left, the European artist John Sylvester captures a fleeting glance, focusing on the play of light and European clothing while really underplaying the chieftain's facial tattoos. On the right, the chieftain himself, Tepehi Kupe, drew his own self-portrait from memory. He ignores the body, the space, and the light entirely, presenting instead a flat tattoo design. To the Maori chieftain, that splendidly composed insignia of his rank was his true image. Differing cultural contexts cause sharp, undeniable differences in how we depict the world.
Mastering art history means stepping outside of your own cultural assumptions to reconstruct the original context of these incredible persisting events. But it leaves us with a lingering challenge. If the European artist and the Maori chieftain saw the exact same man so differently, and if our own perspective is really just one of many pictorial conventions, how does your own culture-bound blindness shape what you see in the world around you today? Keep that in mind as you look at the visual culture of our own era. Thanks for joining this explainer, and we will see you next time.